What you're about to hear has scenes that can be scary and disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Only part of the video has been released to the public. The last part. When you hit play on it, you see a wall in a poorly lit room. The camera appears to be sitting on a table. You immediately hear the sound happening off camera. It's the sound of duct tape being pulled off of a roll. And then, after a short while, you hear what sounds like a garbage bag being opened. That's what it sounds like to me, at least. And that's what it sounds like to the police, too. They also say it's the sound of a crime, of a murder. Perhaps one of many, perhaps all connected. In the first decade of this century, women begin disappearing from Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a familiar story. Not all of the women who go missing are sex workers, but many are. As the clinical saying goes, they live high risk. And because these women live in the shadows, out on the edge, it's not really a pattern anyone puts together until one day in 2009, when a horrible discovery is made in the West Mesa desert. We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good, some of us are wired for bad, but a select few step outside of all society's boundaries. From Cold Open Media, this is Deviant. Welcome back to Deviant. I'm Dan Szematowicz, and it's great to be back with you telling stories and exploring the dark corners that humanity is capable of. It's been a while since we've had one of these, and before we get started, I just want to tell you all about a few changes you'll notice moving forward. We'll still be doing longer multi-part stories like you're used to, but between those, I'll be here bringing you new stories that are more of a one-course meal than a six-course meal. So let's get into our first one of those. This is the story of the West Mesa murders. It's February 2nd, 2009. Christine Ross is on a walk with her dog Rucka on the west side of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's an area known as the West Mesa. They're on a dirt trail when Rucka finds something odd and lets Christine know about it. It's a bone, a big one. According to Albuquerque police, Christine understandably finds this strange and texts a picture of it to her sister, who works in medicine. Her sister texts back saying, "Hey, that's probably a human femur." Christine immediately calls the police. They come out, take a look, and yeah, they agree. It's human, and police begin to dig. They find a body, female, and then they find another, and then another, and then another. Over the course of weeks, the West Mesa is scoured. Eventually, police stop finding remains after 11. So now they have 11 victims to identify and 11 murders to solve. The first thing we need to get a picture of is Albuquerque itself. It's an important part of the background here.
The first day that I ever arrived in Albuquerque, I absolutely fell in love with the climate. I'm from just outside of New York City and very familiar with just unbearable humidity and cold.
This is Darren White.
The Chamber of Commerce, the leading thing they would tell you is that we have over 300 days of sunshine, beautiful weather, and that's absolutely true. The climate is one of the first things that attract people to Albuquerque. It is a beautiful city. It has grown exponentially in the last 50 years. Most people where they live now in Albuquerque 50 years ago was just scrub brush. It didn't exist.
From 2002 to 2009, he's sheriff of Bernalillo County in New Mexico, which is where you'll find Albuquerque. In 2009, he's appointed Albuquerque's public safety director, which puts him in charge of the police department, the fire department, all emergency services, really. This means that he really knows what lies under the sunshine here.
For the last 30, 40 years, New Mexico has always been in the top 10 of the most violent states in the nation. And I think it has a lot to do with that cliche of being part of the Old West. We settle a lot of our disputes with guns and knives, and it's been that way for a while. We have also dealt with the fact that we are a transshipment point for the 75% of all illegal drugs that come into our country come through the southwest border. Meaning, the hardest part about getting illegal drugs into the country is getting them across that border. Once they get them across the border, then they need to be, it's no different than from FedEx. They have a hub, right? And so Albuquerque became that hub.
If you watch Breaking Bad, you'll get the picture of what Albuquerque is like at this time. As Darren says, it's a drug hub. With that comes all the bad things you find in drug hubs. Lots of violent crime, human trafficking, public health issues, and desperate people doing desperate things. Back to early 2009 now, Darren is still sheriff.
So you got to understand the way the police department works and the sheriff's department work. In Albuquerque, we're in the same building. The chief of police and the sheriff occupy the 5th floor of the law enforcement complex. I'm literally a stone's throw. Not only that, Chief Schultz, the first assignment I had in Albuquerque was southeast, which is we refer to as the war zone graveyard, and my sergeant was Ray Schultz. And so I had known Schultz. Ray and I are very good friends. And Ray came over to see me. He just walked over to see me to say, look, we have this case. We found a bone. And, and I can't tell you how, that is something that's not uncommon in our business. Getting a call from somebody to say, we were digging something up in the back and we found a bone. And, and of course we would have the Office of the Medical Investigator come out and they would determine relatively quickly that it was an animal bone. It wasn't a human bone. So, well, quickly, as Ray said, they learned that it was a human bone. Okay, you could have a variety of reasons why there are bones there. They could be very, very old. It could have been a gravesite. It could have been a lot of different things. I mean, a legitimate gravesite. But I remember when I was talking to Ray at that point, they realized that this was bigger than that. And I remember one of the things he was saying to me is that they were using aerial mapping in this particular site. I could see the look on Ray's face that he's pretty stoic guy. I mean, it wasn't like, he wasn't somebody that got emotional from the standpoint of excited or anything. He's a pretty calm character. And, but I could see on Ray's face that he was concerned. He said to me that we think there's other burial sites out there.
Pretty quickly, it becomes clear that the concerns are justified.
Where the original woman was found, there was another one found.
A major multi-agency investigation is launched, with Ray Schultz and the Albuquerque Police Department in the lead. Evidence is tough to come by. The bodies have clearly been buried for a very long time, they're unclothed, and badly decomposed. Causes of death aren't clear, and there isn't much physical evidence to go on. And it's not just that lack of evidence that makes this difficult for police like Darren White and Ray Schultz.
He took me out there. He said, you want to go out? I want to show it to you. And I said, yes. And I mean, the first thing that you realized when you saw the enormity of the area and the number of resources that Ray already had working on it, Ray has said many times it's most likely the largest crime scene in the city's history. And I knew exactly what he meant the minute that we drove in and saw the area on what had been cordoned off. And I also remember Ray saying to me, because again, him and I both have been doing it a long time. And the concern was this wasn't the only site. And at that point, I don't think they had determined that it was 11 women that would ultimately be recovered from the burial sites. But I remember Ray being very concerned that there were many other locations that needed to be at least examined. You have to understand this area called the West Mesa. It's miles and miles long. There are parts of it, if you keep going west, it becomes what's referred to as the Pajarito Mesa. And this is an area where people have basically built shacks. There's no water, there's no sewage, there's nothing, there's no services. But there are many people that live out there in those areas. One, because they want to be left alone. But the worry was there could be potentially anywhere out on the West Mesa.
As the bodies of the 11 women are recovered, it's clear that this is going to be a complicated investigation. Who did this? Is it a serial killer? Does it have something to do with the cartels and human trafficking? The first steps to solving this are in figuring out who these women are, when they ended up in the desert, and how. Were they able to establish how long the victims had been, or guesstimate how long the victims had been out there and sort of over what period of time these crimes were taking place?
Well, the theory always was that it was, between 2003 and 2006,
Right.
because that's when the women, again, even though some of them were reported much later, it seemed as though that was the timeline, the 2003 to 2006. That the majority of them had been missing. But again, how do you know if there weren't many more that didn't have a family member that even after 3-4 months was like, where's our girl? Why haven't we heard from her? Many of them were working with Ida Lopez, Detective Ida Lopez at the time. Ida, who was in charge of missing persons prior to the discovery of the grave sites. Ida had realized that there were a considerable number of girls that, again, the high risk, they were being reported missing. They had numerous arrests, drug offenses, prostitution arrests. And Ida had realized that, I believe that Ida had 17 names initially that she had identified of Albuquerque women who went missing.
One of those names is Julie Nieto. She goes missing on July 15th, 2004. She's 24 years old.
She stayed home with her son. She was living with my dad at the time. She was a very good mom. She was overprotective over that boy, which drove me nuts because she would never put that boy down. He didn't learn to walk till he was about 2.5.
Eleanor Griego is Julie's mom.
Her sense of humor. She tries to cook, but she can't cook for nothing. She does silly things, and she just does funny things to me. And the way she carried on about her son, they would make fun of her because she was too small and too young to have. She was 19 when she had her son, but people wouldn't believe that was her kid. They all thought she was babysitting, and she would get all pissed off and tell me about it, and I'd just laugh at it. I'd go, just deal with it. I saw Julie about maybe a week before she went missing. She was doing good. She was waiting for her son to get out of school. He was in preschool, so she was waiting for him to get off the bus from school. And I left that day, and that was the last time I saw her. The last thing I said to her is keep an eye on her son and be safe, and I'll be back soon.
Julie is reported missing, and an investigation is opened. It goes cold in 2006. 3 years later, Eleanor gets an answer.
I first learned by a friend who called me and told me they found bones up in the West Mesa, and I didn't believe that she would be up there, but when the police told me that they might have found her, that's when I believed her. I was like totally I didn't want to believe it.
Julie is one of the 11 women pulled from the West Mesa. Like the other victims, her remains are identified using DNA and dental records.
It tore me up inside, and I'm still torn up about it. It's like, I don't want to believe it. that she was gone. It just like broke my heart. I still deal with it even to this day. Finding it hard to cope sometimes. Sometimes I'll see a girl that looks like her and I'll just stop dead in my tracks just to look at her, and it's not her.
10 other families face a similar experience. In addition to Julie Nieto, police identify Monica Candelaria, 22, Victoria Chavez, 26, Doreen Marquez, 24, Cinnamon Elks, 32, Selania Edwards, 15, Veronica Romero, 28, Virginia Cloven, 24, Michelle Valdez, 22. Jamie Barella and Evelyn Salazar are cousins and go missing on the same day. Evelyn is 27, Jamie, 15. All 11 go missing in either 2003 or 2004. This is important. It gives a timeline on when these crimes occurred. As police learn more about the victims, it turns out that 10 of the 11 fall into law enforcement's high-risk category. Generally, that means sex work and drug abuse. 15-year-old Jamie Barella is the exception here. And as you may remember from our exploration of serial killer Anthony Sewell and his victims, that also often means that this isn't exactly a population living in the spotlight. It's a place where people who would do harm to others tend to focus. Here's Darren White again.
They always say these are the women that live in the shadows. And that's accurate. That's literally where they operate, in shadows. We've all watched the TV shows, the true crime shows. There's a woman that goes missing. Police are, could she have just gone out with friends? Maybe the boyfriend, they went out for a weekend. And then it always seems that the case turns because she didn't show up at work. And with sex workers, there's nobody paying attention to that. It sure as hell wasn't like her pimp was going to call in and go, hey, my girl didn't show up for work. Something must be wrong. And so that's the complexities of these cases, is that they truly do live in the shadows. Their family has no contact with them. And when you think about somebody who has decided that they are going to target these women, they exploit that. That is a part of their plan to keep from being identified and arrested, because they know that. And so a lot of these women had been missing for months. We have a term, right? I mean, it's kind of a standard in the industry, the first 48. Hell, there's a TV show that I absolutely love that's called that, because that's absolutely true. If you try to develop as much evidence as you can in the first 48 hours of a homicide, because getting that critical information is important to get it as quickly as possible. Here you have cases where they're not even reported missing for months. And those are the things that make these cases so tough.
By late 2009, early 2010, all the victims are identified, and Darren White is no longer the county sheriff. He's Albuquerque's new public safety director, and he oversees the police department. As the investigation turns to finding the person or people who may have done this, all sorts of possibilities are explored and investigated. As we sit here today in 2025, the case is still officially open and unsolved. For those who follow this case from afar or have been directly impacted by it, there are lots of theories. Different names of different killers often come up. You'll see people talking about drug cartels being involved. The evidence for that isn't there. Some suspect rogue police officers too. Again, no evidence tying any law enforcement to these crimes. For many inside the investigation, though, there is most definitely a who. And for Darren White, there's no debate. Let's turn to who may be responsible for these murders. You said the murders happened from 2003.
Lorenzo Montoya, that's who's responsible for it.
Lorenzo Montoya, a known killer who himself was killed in 2006. So why him? What brought investigators there?
It was the work of the detectives. Obviously, he was killed 3 years prior. And You have to remember, there's a lot of people working on this case. There was a giant task force, and they were digging through all of the files. And then, of course, this particular case came up pretty quickly. It was only 3 years old. The circumstances surrounding it, are pretty obvious. You have Lorenzo Montoya. He has a 19-year-old sex worker in his house, Sharika Hill. You have what's very typical in some of these cases is that, he's been referred to as the boyfriend. He's been referred to as the pimp. He's basically her security. I mean, that's what they do. And he's outside, and Lorenzo murders Miss Hill. And as he's coming outside, he's confronted by the boyfriend, who shoots and kills Montoya. And when you look at that case, the first thing about that case is it's 3 miles, basically 3 miles from the graveyard. Lorenzo Montoya did not wake up in December 2006 and decide, this is the day that I'm going to actually start doing this. He had a history, yes. But I just think there were too many things about that case. When something seems obvious, it usually is.
Occam's razor. Yeah.
And, I remember Ray, Chief Schultz, we were talking about the case. We were talking about, there were other suspects. There were several people that were on the radar. But when that case was brought, and we sat down and Ray and I talked about it, we couldn't say that conclusively that it was Lorenzo Montoya. But I will believe, as long as I'm alive, is that he was responsible for the murder.
Have you seen the videotape?
Yeah. So there's I've not seen the woman. That's the only part of it I didn't see.
Remember the sound of the duct tape and garbage can from earlier? That's what we're talking about here. Police say that when searching Lorenzo Montoya's home, they find a camera with a home recording on it. In the first part of the video, before you hear the sounds, Montoya can be seen having sex with a woman. Police don't know who she is, and they can't tell whether she's alive or dead.
Everyone knows that has seen that video is that is a woman being duct taped. That is an unknown victim being duct taped. As I said, he didn't wake up in December of 2006 and decide, this is the day that I not only go out and pick up a sex worker, but it's the day I kill one. You'll never convince me of that. He did that. It was completely thought out. It was well executed, except for the fact that when he went outside, Sharika Hill's boyfriend was waiting for her. And had it not been for that, and he wasn't going to stop. I mean, that wasn't like, hey, let me get this out of my system, and this will be the last time I do it. Maybe he's hoping that's what happens. They're just hardwired differently than we are. And he's just wasn't going to wake up the next day after that murder and say, this is the day that I stop. I'm going to turn my life around. No, he would have continued doing it. And I believe he had been doing it. I believe the fact that he's 3 miles from the site, and if you see where he lived in that trailer and where the grave site is, what do you think? He's going to take that body 10 miles, 15 miles across town and risk being picked up? No. I think it's important that the investigators kept an open mind and continued to look at every suspect possible, but there's nothing that's going to change my mind. You'd wish there was something that just could connect him definitively to the murders. But I also have to tell you guys, I don't think that's going to happen.
He has all the makings when you put it together of, a classic organized serial sexual offender, right? Assuming he did this, the duct tape, the organized MO, the dump site 3 miles from his house, right? Like, it's all circumstantial, but if you're looking at a classic serial sexual offender, a certain kind of victimology, all that stuff, right? Like, it all seems to fit. And, of course, no more bodies after he's dead.
And he killed Sharika Hill to kill her.
Yeah. Yes.
And look, there are many people out there that do bad things and they're deviants, but they're not killers. And as I said, they do awful things. They're rapists, but they're not killers. And Lorenzo Montoya was a killer. He killed a sex worker, and he was going to dispose of her body. And as I said, it wasn't the first time he did that. The girls, like you said, they stopped going missing. And that always comes back to that, well, are there other places? Could there be other sites? Absolutely. And if they had not started the dirt work for that housing development, they probably never would have been found. But there's no evidence. There just isn't. It's just what made this case so difficult to solve. And you never want to say never. What would it be at this time is somebody that, said, oh yeah, he told me once, that he killed these women and, that he buried them somewhere. And that would be important information to have. And based on the circumstances that we already know, is that conclusive enough? I don't know. I don't think so. And remember, it is 15 years since the discovery, but it's almost 20 years probably since the last victim was taken to the graveyard. I'll say one thing. I know the people that were involved in it, Ray Schultz, Alan Banks, Ida Lopez, you always have that case. They always say the case, right? This is the one that will upset them the most that they weren't able to solve. Because I know it was difficult to sit in those rooms. It's bad enough when you have the family of one victim, when you have the families of 11 victims. It's gut-wrenching. And you want to do everything in your power to bring them solace, comfort, or whatever the hell it is you could possibly give them to make them feel a little bit better about the most awful situation in the world. And I know they would give anything to have this case solved. But I think they also, having been at this as long as we have, they realized that the potential for that is evaporating every single day.
If you want to see the portion of the video taken from Lorenzo Montoya's camera, visit our Patreon at deviantpodcast.com. Absolutely free to join. Also, make sure to visit us on social at deviant.podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Till next time, thanks for listening. Deviant is written, produced, and executive produced by Clark Goldband, Andrew Iden, and me, Dan Szematowicz, with original scoring by Shuvo Sur. Sales, marketing, and distribution support comes from our partners at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media.